Thank you so much for joining today for the grant information session for our the Boise City Department of Arts and History annual grant. I'll go ahead and kind of go through a few housekeeping things, and then we'll go ahead and dive into more information about the program. So again, thank you so much. Today is April 29th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining us for this information session. I'd first like to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people from where I am standing today. Thank you for being here. If you're here live, this will also be recorded and then posted to our website, boiseartsandhistory.org, so you can watch it again, refer back to pieces of information that you want to revisit, or even share it with other people in your organization or others that might be interested in learning more about the program. I will also say this is our virtual or recorded session, but I'll also be doing two in-person information sessions, one tomorrow at noon at Hillcrest Library up on the bench, and then one on Saturday at 5:30 at Global Lounge Commons in the multi-purpose room. So if you want to meet with me, meet with other people in person or have that more in-person experience, those will be other opportunities that you can join us for. So again, thank you so much, and we'll go ahead and dive in. I will mention too, almost forgot, for any questions that you might have, please feel free to use the Q&A function. I will be kind of peeking at that throughout the information session, and then at the end I saved some time to cover any questions that maybe I missed that are lingering questions that you still have that weren't covered. So we'll make sure to refer to those. So please use the Q&A function, and we'll go ahead and get going. All right. So first off, hi everyone, my name is Emily Shivers. I'm the Grants and Public Programs Manager for the Boise City Department of Arts and History. I've been in my role for almost 9 months now, so still pretty new, but have met many of you and hoping to meet more of you that are on the webinar today. As you can see, my contact information there on the screen. It's also on the website. Please, I'm always happy to meet with you in person, virtually, over the phone, answer any questions that you might have. I'm also offering office hours on Wednesdays and Thursdays for the next month or so, month and a half, during the open period of the application. So please feel free to sign up for those. You can get the link here on the website, as well at boiseartsandhistory.com, and then also, boiseartsandhistory.org, as well as just email me and I will send you the link. Best way to get it to you, I will get it to you. So please sign up for those office hours. And if those times don't work for you, I'm happy to schedule something with you separately. Just let me know what times do work for you and I will get it on the calendar. All right, so for today, our agenda is first starts with just an overview of the program itself. We'll go into the criteria, types of projects that have been funded and that we would fund through this annual grant program. Just some application basics, a few tips, tricks, and suggestions, and then questions at the end, as I mentioned. If any questions come up, please feel free to add them into the Q&A just as a reminder, and I will be keeping an eye on that as well. All right, so we'll go ahead and dive into the annual grant program. So just a quick overview of what the annual grant is. So each year annually, the Boise City Department of Arts and History awards $150,000 in funding to established and emerging arts, history, and cultural organizations, specifically projects and programs, grants that benefit Boise residents or benefit Boise's community. So the mission here, our mission for the department, is to cultivate a distinct sense of place, which reflect Boise's rich past, diverse communities, and unique natural setting by creating opportunities that nurture and sustain Boise's creative economy. So that's what we're hoping to do through these grant programs that we offer, especially the annual grant program. And it's really, the purpose is to help fund meaningful creative projects and programs for Boise residents. All right. So really the goal also is that we are trying to create a city for everyone. And so the goal is that we, through these projects, we are able to do that. So the City of Boise's vision is to create a city for everyone, and we're hoping that we can help accomplish that. All right, so just a little bit of background to the program. It began in 1997, so it's been around for a few years now. It's funded over 500 projects and programs since it was created, and has awarded over 2.1 million in those 27 years. So I think the department and the city as a whole is really proud of what the program has been able to do, and we're so looking forward to continuing that with this year's 2025 program. So as you can see in 2025, it is October projects need to take place between October 1, 2024 and September 30th of 2025. So the reason that we call this the annual grant and we say the FY 2025 or fiscal year 2025 grant is the city's fiscal year starts in October and ends in September. And so that's hopefully helps explain a little bit of why the schedule and the cycle is set up like it is. And so that's why those dates are the way that they are for each of our grant programs. So we will accept applications for projects that focus on arts, history, and cultural fields. So we'll go into the types of projects and programs that have been funded through the annual program, as well as some suggestions or ideas of what could be funded under it. For this one, we do ask that requests are between $1,000 and $5,000, with $5,000 being the max, in $500 increments. So even if your project is, $2,135, round up to that $500 increment just to make it a little easier on the panelists when they're reviewing. And so one thing with if you've applied for the Catalyst and maybe are applying for the annual grant for the first time, the annual grant requests for funding can be no more than 50% of the overall project budget. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we go through the budget and the budget template in a moment, but just keep in mind that requests, so that amount that you request cannot be more than 50% of the overall budget of the project. If awarded, this one is also a little different than the Catalyst. If you are more familiar with that one, and if you don't know that one, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to give you more information about it. But this one, if you are awarded, we do split up. So you receive the first 80% of your award after you sign the agreement, you fill out a W-9 form, and you submit us an invoice. And that happens after October 1 of 2024 when the fiscal year begins. And then the remaining 20% of that grant is awarded after you submit a final report and that second invoice. And we ask that that be done 30 days within the completion of your project, but no later than September 1 of 2025. There is a little bit of wiggle room there. So if, for instance, your project, you're looking at something that's going to take place in September of 2025, please just let me know in advance, and most likely we'll be able to make it work. But just to make it as easy as possible on our fiscal team and to make sure that we have the time needed to process all of the payments and all of the final paperwork, we ask that those get submitted by September 1, but there is a little wiggle room, so we'll just talk to me and we'll make sure that it gets worked out. I will say we do need to make sure that things are closed out by the end of September of 2025. Something to note is individuals, groups, and organizations can apply, and you do not have to be a registered 501c3. Please note, though, for individual artists or groups that are not registered as 501c3, there does have to be a public community benefit, again, for Boise residents, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the criteria portion. And then just note for individuals that might be applying or those that are part of a group that are not a registered 501c3 or maybe not haven't gotten their LLC or a business, there might be tax implications. So if you have questions about that, I would talk to maybe an accountant or someone that you trust with your financials on what that might look like for you. But the requirement is that in order to receive the funds from the city, you would have to fill out a W-9 tax form. So just keep that in mind. It is something to consider, especially for individuals that are applying. All right, so quickly, the timeline for this grant, it opens today. So as of today, this morning, early this morning, you can go review the application. You can start filling it out. I will say, quick recommendation that I might repeat myself, but I always recommend filling it out on a Word document or a Google Doc or whatever you use before you directly apply in Zoom Grants. Zoom Grants can be a little glitchy, the software that we use for our grant program. So I always recommend, if you might already do this, but start in a Word doc and then copy and paste over. But you're more than welcome to go review the application, see what it looks like, make sure you have an account set up, and we'll talk more about Zoom Grants in a little bit, but it is open now. The grant will close on June 14th. That's a Friday, and it will close pretty promptly at 11:59 p.m. or midnight that night. So my recommendation is try to avoid that really late night application because if there are any issues, I won't be able to speak to you or help support you until the next week. So my recommendation is try to do it earlier than later, sooner than later. And then if you do have any issues with submittal, I can see what I can do to help, or you could reach out to Zoom Grants directly and they will help you. So quick tip and trick there as well. Applicants are typically notified no later than September 15th. And so hopefully it will be prior to that, but that's kind of the deadline that we let applicants know of their status of their application. And then, as I mentioned, October 1 is when those first invoices, if you are awarded, can start to be submitted for that first 80% of payment. And then we do recommend within 30 days of the completion of your project, submitting that second invoice along with the final report. So that's just a brief look at what the timeline looks like. So that time period between June and September is when there's a panel review. The panel is made up of members of the community that have expertise in an arts, history, or cultural field, as well as members of the Arts and History Commission, our commission here for the City for Arts and History. And so that panel gets together, reviews the grants, makes recommendations. Those recommendations go to City Council as well as mayor for review, and then they become finalized, and then that's when we would then notify applicants. And so that's why there's a little bit of a buffer zone between the deadline and when grant applicants are notified, because it goes through a pretty extensive review process, panel review, and then we notify people. So if you have any questions on that, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them, but that's what that time period looks like. All right, so eligibility proposals must be completed by an individual or a representative of a group or of an organization, or it could be a nonprofit, but again, it does not have to be a registered 501c3. It could also be a friends group of a government agency, but it cannot be a government entity itself. It must have, as I mentioned, again, that direct benefit for residents living within Boise city limits. And if you go to the webpage, which I'll show you how to direct to our webpage at the end here, you can take a look and see what constitutes Boise city limits. So we just need to make sure that it's benefiting them. It can be an organization that's maybe located outside of Boise city limits that's doing an event inside. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an organization with an organization with a Boise address, as long as the event, project, program is taking place within Boise city limits. So if you have questions about that, please let me know and I'd be happy to discuss with you. We also ask that it meet the Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines, and there's a link on our webpage again to what those are specifically. We also ask that it comply with the Department of Arts and History Equal Opportunity Statement, which says Boise City Department of Arts and History does not discriminate in its programs and activities on the basis of race, religion, national origin, sex, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, and or disability. So we ask that it comply with that. And then finally, this is new, and I'll talk a little bit more about some new things from years prior in the annual grant program, but we do require that it include the approved budget template. That's located on the website. It's actually located where you can download it through the Zoom Grant software, the Zoom Grants app. If you can't find it somewhere or having issues downloading it, please reach out to me and I would be more than happy to just send you a copy. And please let me know if you have any issues with that, but it's available quite a few places. Probably the website's the easiest place to just quickly download the Excel sheet. So we do require that you use that in order for our panel to even review your application. And that just makes it easier so that we're looking at the same budgets and the same templates for all groups. And it's a little easier on our panelists. And I think hopefully easier on you all when you're applying to have that standard template. All right, we'll go ahead and move to budget as we're speaking of it. So I just wanted to quickly review it since we are requiring this new budget template. It's a similar budget template from years prior, but now it's a requirement to include. So the budget template looks like this. The top has expenses. And so in that expenses, I'll just go quickly through some of what each of these columns mean. We just ask that you'll notice on the far left, it has some item descriptions. We ask that you don't change those, but you'll notice at the bottom, it says other expenses, and that's where you can put in things that maybe you don't feel fit within the already listed description. So for instance, something that maybe fits outside of planning and administration, venue, technical and production, you can put in other expenses. And you'll notice on the far right, there's an explanation column where you can add details of what those expenses are. I will say the more detailed, the better. It just gives your budget is sort of your number narrative, if you will, of your project or program. So the more detailed that you can be in numbers and what those numbers mean, that's another just quick tip for you all. It just makes it clearer for the panel in the review process. So please don't change the headings, and hopefully there's still areas for you to include those expenses that you need to in the other expense category. We also just understand that you won't maybe necessarily need to fill out every single row on this Excel sheet. Like if you maybe don't have production costs for your event, depending on what it might be, then you wouldn't need to fill out that row, and that's okay. So please use the budget template and make sure use it for your project. So for instance, if you have planning administration costs, but not technical production, you'd fill the numbers in for the planning and not for the production, technical production. So please don't feel like you need to put numbers in every single area. Just use the ones that you need for your project. Cash expenses, that column, those are the things that you will have to pay for directly. So say you will have to definitely pay for a speaker. That would go under a cash expense. Maybe it's a microphone. That would also go under a cash expense. The in-kind and volunteer column, those were the expenses that you would normally have to pay for, but instead are being donated or discounted heavily. That also includes volunteer hours. So let's say you have a group of volunteers planning an event. You could put that under the planning and administration, and you could estimate the number of hours that they would spend to work on that project. And then you'll notice in the notes for filling out the budget, there is an area where we have calculated the standard volunteer rate. Rate of pay for a volunteer. It's $31.80. You can see that and use that. So then you could estimate how much time a volunteer was dedicating and put that in the in-kind and volunteer column there. And so we do ask that you, again, if anything that you would typically pay for, but is being discounted, donated, or volunteers, please make sure that you're including that in your expense in your in-kind/volunteer column in your budget. Again, the other expenses are used for items related to your project that maybe aren't best described already, so you could include those there. And just note, we'll talk about this in a second, but that sort of bottom total project expenses in red here with the yellow box next to it, that is that number must match your income. So we want to make sure that, and hopefully you'll want to make sure that you have the income to support whether it's expected or already secured, but you'll have the income to support whatever expenses that you'll have for your project. So speaking of income, we'll go to that section of the budget. Again, I'm happy to meet with anyone individually if you have specific budget questions related to your project or program that I'm not answering here today because I'm keeping it pretty broad. But please feel free to reach out to me, and I can hopefully give you some clarity, feedback, and help you with whatever it is that you're struggling with. So for income, as I mentioned, it looks very similar, but this is what you are, again, don't need to fill out every column, but this is what you're expecting to come in, or maybe funds that you've already secured that already received. So secured would be those confirmed funds that you could put in here, and that might be maybe you've already received a donation from maybe a foundation or something, or a group of individuals. You would put those as confirmed funds because you've already received those. Expected would be those things that you're expecting to come in, but maybe haven't yet secured or don't physically have yet in your budget. And this is where you're going to put in your expected amount for this grant program. So again, it's going to be between the $1,000 and $5,000 amount. And just note $500 increments, please. And make sure that it's not more than 50% of the total project expenses. So if you remember, we asked that it be no more than 50% of your total project budget. So keep in mind that that could also be in-kind or volunteer hours do count towards that match. So it could be that you have quite a bit of your expenses are actually volunteer time or donated venue space or whatever it might be, that does contribute to that match, that overall match of the 50%. So please keep that in mind as well. And then again, as I mentioned, that this is the other bucket, that green square on the screen you'll see has to match that expenses. So your expenses has to match your income that you are anticipating to receive, whether it's secured or expected. Again, happy to answer any questions that you have, so please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have specific questions to your project or program. All right, so just a few quick things that I wanted to highlight that are new this year, especially if you've applied to this program in the past. We did have that updated eligibility, so the requirement of including the budget template that I just went through. Again, please let me know if you have questions. We also have updated criteria, which I'm about to go through in just a moment. So it's sort of a little bit of a different breakdown, but to be very honest, it's a lot of the same considerations and criteria. I just sort of categorize them differently. So take a look and we'll go through this in a moment. So please let me know if you have questions. And there's also a few special considerations that we'll talk about in a moment. And then I just want to, we didn't have this in place last year either, but I wanted to say quickly that there is no longer a policy about the number of years that you can apply in a row. I think in years past, there had been a policy that you could only apply 3 times and receive the grant 3 times before you had to take a break. That policy is no longer in place. So if you've received grants for the past 3 years, please continue to apply, keeping in mind the criteria and all the things that we'll mention here today. But that policy is no longer in place. So please keep in mind that you can apply even if you've received grants in the past from us. All right, so speaking of criteria, I mentioned we would go through that quickly. So the grant applications are reviewed, as I mentioned, by our panel, and that panel looks closely at sort of looks like 5 areas that I'll be going through with more detail, but it's quality, community benefit, alignment with the City of Boise and Arts and History Department mission, accessibility, and management. So I'm going to break down each of these and what they mean right now. So when thinking about quality, that's really thinking about a clear description of the project that you're looking to be funded, including artistic, historic, or cultural components. And then I want to really mention that and how funding will be used. That's what we really want to see clearly. How will this funding support this project? So highly recommend including that in, and that's what we'll be looking at for quality. Also, looking at biographies of that describe the background, experience, and training of the people included in your application. So that are going to be relied upon for that kind of artistic, historic, and cultural component. So that expertise could be a lot of different things, and I want to make sure that that's clear. It can be a formal educational setting, someone, a professor who is an expert in a field. It can be passed down within a community or cultural group. It could be through a job, an apprenticeship, an internship, and it can be in really non-traditional settings. So any of those things or combinations of those things can make someone provide them with the expertise to support your project or program, depending on what it is. So we're not always just looking for someone, you know, for example, like with a PhD or something like that. It can be gained in a lot of different ways. So please keep that in mind as well. So that's quality. Moving to community benefit. I think I've been clear, but it really needs to have that community public benefit for Boise residents that contributes to our overall cultural community. So explain kind of why is your project meaningful, what drives it, and why is it important for residents, and then who is the intended audience. So clearly describe the types of audiences that you're planning to attract, and kind of note how you plan to attract those audiences. So what is your sort of strategy for capturing the people that you would like? So I do always want to note that a project can have a very small or specific intended audience and still have community benefit. And I'll talk a little bit more and provide some examples of that when I talk about projects that we have funded in the past. And then mission alignment. So we, first off, we want projects that bring people together and build positive relationships that ultimately help create a city for everyone. And on our website and on the guidelines, there's a link to sort of the city's overall vision and mission statements. And so really it's broad in the best way, is that we want to allow you to tell us how your project fits into that sort of vision and mission and helps move that mission forward. Similarly, it needs to align with the Department of Arts and History mission, which is to cultivate a distinct sense of place, which reflects Boise's rich past, diverse communities, and unique natural setting. So again, pretty broad, but purposefully so. We want you to tell us specifically how your project helps accomplish that as well. And that's one of the newer additions from previous years' criteria. And then accessibility. So we look at this a few different ways, but particularly for our grant programs, we think of accessibility defined as affordability. So is it a free or low cost experience? And we typically, the best fit for this grant program is tickets are $20 or less per person for your programs. The more accessible, the better. And so there also is opportunities that if you have some tickets that are above that price point, if there are clear opportunities for scholarships, financial aid, that would also help support that sort of that criteria of affordability. Also, we are looking for programs and projects that are inclusive. So thinking about ways that it offers accommodations such as hearing, vision, physical ability, language translation, again, scholarship or financial aid, those are all ways to make something more inclusive. So for this grant program, those are kind of really the two pieces that we're looking for and hope that you mention in your application related to your project. And then finally, management. So that's kind of the nitty gritty details, the logistics. So who are the people responsible for making sure that this project happens? Who are the project managers, if you will? How is planning and logistics happening? Are there licenses or approvals needed? Are there venue reservations that have been made? And then timeline as well as program evaluation. So these are kind of again, the logistics side of your project and program, and we'll have questions specific to that in the application. This also includes the budget. So is your budget balanced? Is it detailed? Does it provide the information necessary to understand your project or program and how it's funded? So I mentioned that one new thing is kind of special considerations that we're looking at this year. So one is if you've attended a grant information session, if for whether that's virtual, recorded here, or in person, or even consulting with me is another one. We highly recommend it just to get your questions answered. So that's one consideration that we're making. Also, first-time applicants, we're really trying to lean into those kind of emerging organizations or organizations that maybe have been around that haven't had the capacity to apply for funding from arts and history. So that's another consideration that we're looking at. And then finally, we will look at outcomes related to past years arts and history grant awards, and that's only if applicable. So for instance, if there were any previous issues or anything like that, that might be something that we would consider for the following year. But thankfully haven't had too many of those come up. So really thankful to our cultural community and former grant recipients for being amazing and doing great work. But those are all things that are considerations that we might make when reviewing applicants. All right, so just another quick reminder now that we're sort of uh, close to halfway through, a little over halfway through, but just the Q&A is there, so please let me know if you have questions. If they're very specific to your project or program you're thinking about, reach out to me, schedule a meeting with me, email me, call me, all the ways, and I'm happy to talk to you specifically about your project or program as well. All right, we're gonna just quickly jump into types of projects that have been funded and things that you might consider. So types of projects in the past, we've funded our performing arts specific, visual arts, could be collaborations, lots of people coming together to host some kind of festival event or venue event or celebration. It could be initiatives from specific community cultural groups. It could relate to historical or preservation related organizations, could be literary based, could be readings, performances, those kinds of things. Could be cultural events, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of these examples for some of these. It could also be educational programs, it could be workshops, and we've also funded exhibits of lots of different kinds, whether they be virtual, online, or as well as physical exhibits in person. So I'll just briefly talk about a few examples of what those might look like. So performing arts, for instance, we've had Idaho Dance Theater as a grant recipient in the past. We funded their fall show as well as at least in this past year, I know in prior years. So performing arts could be dance, could be singing, music, lots of different types of performing arts. And we have definitely funded those and would love to see them come through in applications. Visual art, so thinking about visual artists, painting, lots of different examples. Here is artist Stephen Ifiga, who was funded from last year in our annual grant program to develop Third World Africa 2, an exhibit that will be hopefully on view in a few months. And so another example of funding of visual arts. I mentioned an example of maybe a smaller scope, not a 500-person event, but this is a great example is initiatives from the community cultural groups like African Community Development, which is a local organization that brings together women and teaches traditional basket weaving for African basket weaving, and then allows them to sell those baskets. And so very much a specific intended audience, but still lots of community benefits. So it doesn't always, as I mentioned, have to be a 500-person event. It could be a specific audience that is intended to be reached. Again, historical or preservation. This is actually kind of two things. It's also an exhibit from TAG Historical Research, a great example of kind of funding towards research as well as then a public benefit through the exhibit itself. Community cultural events, Idaho Japanese Association does Japan Day. We funded that for the past few years. I know there was a small break due to COVID, but another great example of large community benefit happens lots of times I think last year was in Julia Davis Park. And so huge community benefit and that cultural event specific to Japanese culture. A great one from last year, Kate Walker, thinking about educational programs and workshops. She brought in actually a national art author to do workshops with the students at Boise State, and it was open to the public. And then there were open events, including an exhibit as well as readings that the public could attend. So a great example of kind of that educational side of programming. And then I mentioned exhibits. So Arlie Summer has done a food history, Boise food culture exhibit with photos by Guy Hand featured here. So lots of different options, and this is not an extensive list. The list goes on. So please, if you have an idea, let me know if you have questions, but feel free, as long as it has that community public benefit for Boise residents, keep it in mind. All right, and I'm just going to quickly go over, I mentioned Zoom Grants before. So Zoom Grants is the online website that we use for our applications. So if you go to zoomgrants.com, you should be able to pull it up from whatever browser you are on whatever computer and be able to log in. It is free to create an account. So if you already have an account because you've applied in the past, please feel free to use that, or you can create a new one. If you're applying on behalf of an organization and maybe you're newer to that organization, maybe ask around and see if there's already an account that exists for the organization. And if so, we recommend reaching out to Zoom Grants and just letting them know, hey, I don't have access to this, but I'm part of this organization, and they can help you potentially connect to that account. So please, I don't have access to your account information, but I will lead you to Zoom Grant questions at zoomgrants.com and the email address, and they're pretty quick and really responsive. So highly recommend reaching out to them if you have questions about an account or information, any of that stuff. Unfortunately, I can't help too much, but I can help direct you to the right person. They also have wonderful tutorials, as well as it's called Zoom Grants U. It's like their little university tutorial page. So if you have questions about how to do something, that's a great place to start. But again, I will do my best when it comes to questions on Zoom Grants, or I will direct you to the right person. So please feel free to reach out to me as well. But Zoom Grants, again, you can create an account or log into one that already exists. From our webpage, there is a link to directly start your application for the annual grant. So you should be good to move forward, but let me know if you have any issues getting the application started. As I mentioned, Zoom Grants can be a little tricky, a little glitchy at times. So I highly recommend kind of copying the application questions in a Word doc or Google Doc or whatever you use and starting there, and then copying, pasting into Zoom Grants once you're ready. Just because it does auto save and do some of those things, but I've heard too many stories where it was supposed to autosave, glitched out, and everything was gone. So I want to prevent you all from having that experience. So highly recommend doing it outside of Zoom grants before. But it should autosave your answers and remember where you left off in your application. But again, that tip is do it in Word first. And then Zoom Grant, so again, creating and login to account. There'll be application questions you can see listed there. I also put the application questions from our website on the guidelines at the very end. So if you want to go there, you can also see what you need to answer or will be asked to answer in Zoom Grants. You're required to include that budget template, and the budget template is in Zoom Grants as well as online, where I can send it to you. Other attachments are all optional, and so my recommendation is if you feel an attachment helps tell the story of your project or program, like for instance, if it's a work sample from a particular artist or resumes or CVs from someone who is bringing cultural expertise or historic expertise or whatever it may be, please feel free to include those, but they are optional and should just be an addition if it helps tell a story, but they won't be scored on in any way. It might just help clarify or provide support for those answers. So something to keep in mind, that you're more than welcome to attach resumes, work samples, things like that, but they are not required. We always please offer assistance, any assistance that you might need in the application process. So our commitment is to providing that and engaging everyone, providing that City for Everyone experience. So please let me know as soon as possible if you need any support, accommodation, whatever that may be, and I will do my best to make that happen as quickly as possible for you. So please reach out. And then just a few tips just to thinking about hopefully the positive outcome of this process, hopefully for you. If you are awarded, you will be asked to sign a City of Boise agreement. This is the contractual agreement between the city and you or your organization or whoever it is, that just talks about the terms of the grant and what will be expected. We also, as I mentioned earlier, will ask for a W-9, and that just allows us to process the payment to you or your organization or whatever it may be. And then we will ask that invoices be submitted through Zoom Grants. And I have some helpful how-tos for how to do all of this through Zoom Grants. So if you are to be awarded, I send all of that information out, and I'm happy to help walk people through that process through Zoom Grants. But we do ask that all of that happen through the Zoom Grants software that I mentioned. I also mentioned this earlier, but we award the first 80% at the beginning of the grant, and then the remainder, the 20%, is after you submit the final report and second invoice. So please keep that in mind, that there's sort of that 80-20 split with the annual grant. And then finally, at the end, you will be asked for a final report within 30 days of the completion of your project. As I mentioned, we try to have that submitted by September 1st so that our fiscal team has the time to process that before the end of the fiscal year, the 30th. If you did need a little of an extension, please let me know. I'm happy to provide that on a case by case, and I can let you know. We like to just mention that if you are awarded and then you do your project, we do ask for 5 photos to be uploaded with the final report. So I love to give a very early heads up on that in case you need to find a photographer, hire a photographer. Maybe there's someone internally you have to schedule, or maybe it's just you, which is okay. But we do ask that there's 5 photographs submitted with that final report of the project, whether that's maybe the event or the final product, if it's a visual arts piece, whatever it may be. So just something to keep in mind early on. I just have a few suggestions, and then I'll take any questions. So I see some Q&A happening, so I will make sure to answer those in just a moment. So please, again, reminder, use the Q&A and I'll answer those in very soon. So some suggestions, things to keep in mind. I've already given you a few tips and tricks, but a few more. So just remember, for individuals or small groups, there is the W-9, so there could be tax implications. So talk to whoever it is that you trust with your financials and ask about what that might mean for you. You can include in-kind in your budget, as mentioned, so the in-kind values can be a part of your budget. We do recommend, I think, anytime that, especially for smaller organizations or individuals, if there are partnership components, make sure to confirm those prior to applying. It just strengthens an application when there's already the buy-in and the agreement, even if it's a verbal agreement of who will be participating. So if you're planning to partner with X organization, make sure they know that you're planning to partner with them before applying for the grant funding. So it just again strengthens that application, and maybe they can even provide you support and help or read through before you submit the application as well. I always just recommend going through the guidelines. So the guidelines are on the website. I'll show you exactly where those are located in a moment. But review the guidelines and criteria really carefully. So kind of go back through and look at, what is management looking for? What is, what is quality? What are all these pieces? And make sure that those are very clearly addressed in your answers to the application questions. The goal is that the questions help make that as easy as possible for you when you're applying, but just keep that in mind and read that criteria really carefully. Make sure that you're being clear and concise. And as I mentioned, it's always helpful to get someone, whether it be someone else in your organization, maybe someone that you trust outside of your organization, to read your application prior to submitting. I'm also, I mentioned earlier, I'm also available to do that. I'm happy to read applications prior to submission. I just ask that you give me at least a week prior to the deadline to review what you wrote, to A, have time to read it myself, and B, give you time to implement whatever feedback is given. I will just give my disclaimer. I do not serve on the panel. I help facilitate the panel, but I do not serve and I'm not a voting member. So suggestions are purely based off of what my knowledge of the criteria and what the panel will be looking at, which is that criteria. So quick disclaimer, but I'm happy to review applications as well. Or if you want someone from your organization to do that, that's another great, or all of the above. Have lots of people read it and give feedback prior to submitting. One thing to keep in mind is try to connect the dots. So hopefully thinking about, how do each of these pieces connect back to your project? So try to make sure that you're telling a pretty clear narrative of what your project or program is throughout your application. And it's okay to repeat yourself if that makes sense. So don't feel like you'll get dinged or anything if you do that. So the clearer, the better, and the more concise and the clearer your narrative, the better. One recommendation is it always makes an application stronger if instead of saying that you will do something or might or maybe, or sorry, instead of saying what you might or maybe or could do, say what you will do or are planning to do or have already done in some cases. So I think really using strong language that sometimes the wills, or sorry, sometimes the mights and maybes can make it feel like a project's not actually going to happen. So a lot of times the panelists are, that strong language resonates a lot. So keep that in mind as you're filling out your application. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of repeating, but I'm more than happy to work with you, answer questions. I have office hours. You have my email address. It's on the website, which I'll show you shortly. I'm happy to review the proposal, review your application prior to submitting, and your budget as well. You can send those to me. And again, just it's first come, first serve, and please give me at least a week prior to the deadline so I have some time to get you the feedback that you can then implement. And then if you get the grant, just some tips, follow the instructions that will be provided. I'm going to give you information, like lots of tip sheets on how to do things to make it as easy as possible with screenshots, because Zoom grants isn't always the easiest, but I have lots of screenshots to walk you through what those next steps will look like. Always refer back to your accepted application. So with this grant program, the projects and programs that get approved are what are sort of being expected that will be carried out. Obviously, things change maybe a venue changes, maybe someone's sick and a speaker drops out. Those are inevitable and they happen and we're okay with that. Just make sure to let us know as soon as possible. And if anything happens that's more than kind of 25% of your budget, like major budgetary changes, that is when I definitely need to know as soon as possible because we'll have to go through some internal processes at that point just to make sure that you're staying as close as possible to what was expected. And it might also require bringing in our director just to approve those changes. But for the most part, just communication is key. Let me know, and there shouldn't be too many issues. But we understand things change, but try to stick as closely as possible to that approved program that you proposed and submitted. And then don't forget to arrange for photographs. That's I feel like sometimes something I know I'm been guilty of is the last thing I think about. But make sure to have photographs of the event so that you can submit those or project or program so you can submit those with that final report. All right, so it looks like we have a few questions. I'll do those questions in just a moment. I'm gonna stop sharing. And I'm just going to quickly bring up and show everyone how to find uh, all of the information that I mentioned on our webpage. So boiseartsandhistory.org, if you go here, you'll see grant opportunities. If you click on that and then you head down, I mentioned the Catalyst Grant Program. You can learn more about that information on that program here. If you click on the annual grant program, it'll take you to the web page, and that's where you can find lots of information, including a link to the guidelines, which have all the information that I just shared, as well as the application questions if you want to review those and criteria, all of that. Application, actually, as I mentioned, you can apply now. It is open, so you can click on the link and get started and just take a look and see Zoom grants and get used to Zoom grants. Has eligibility, information sessions, as I mentioned. You can register for the in-person ones that you're all here, so thank you for attending already. Office hours, you can book a meeting with me, as well as templates like the Excel sheet, budget sheet that I was mentioning. There's also a W-9 and the guidelines, and then a way to contact me if you have questions. So all of that is on our webpage. So now that we've done that, I'm going to quickly answer some of the questions that were submitted. So someone asked specifically if it has to be a Google or a Word doc or a Google Doc. Does it have to be Word? It does not. So it can be a Google Doc, it could be a Word doc. Just make sure that I have the proper permissions or access to view whatever it is that you're sharing. And same with if you're uploading that into an application, you want to make sure sometimes Google can be tricky and you think that people have the right permissions to view something, but it's not shared. So just note that if you're using Google, make sure that it's shared with the right people or it's open access to that document, but no preference on Google or Word. So no problem. Someone asked, is it okay if the event is a fundraiser? So unfortunately, we cannot fund the grant cannot fund fundraisers, so that is not something that that the city's grant funding can fund. You'll also notice in our guidelines, there's an area that talks about things that are restricted from funding. So I also highly recommend that everyone go to the guidelines page on our website and go down to that restricted from funding. Fundraisers is listed there, so we cannot fund fundraisers. So keep that in mind as well and see if there's anything else there that might prevent you from applying for the idea you have for a project or program. All right, those were all the questions that I had so far. Anyone have any other questions they want to submit? All right. Looks like no. So that is it for this annual grant program information session. As I mentioned, there's two others, two in person. So please feel free to join us if If you want some more, it'll look very similar to this one, but also this recording will be uploaded onto our website on that page I just showed you how to navigate to, just probably in the next few days. So keep an eye out for it and you can refer back to this and share it, as I mentioned, with others that might be interested. But please reach out if you have any other specific questions. But thank you so much for joining today and looking forward to hopefully seeing some wonderful projects and programs and applications come through in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much and have a great day.